Welcome to Doing Business with a Servant's Heart. Doing business in life with a purpose, serving others, and achieving success. I'm your host, Steve Ramona. We created this show for you because we want everyone to learn how to do business and life to make an impact in the world. What impact will you make today? I want to welcome my incredible guest. I got to know him before the show in the green room. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Hi, Steve. Thanks so much.
You have such a great story, but I wanted to start with, if you had to start an all new career, what would have it been?
You know, I love what I do, but I've oftentimes looked up at the sky, and I think I probably would have been an astronomer. And I walk to the gym every morning, and it's at night. It's like 5 a.m, and I look up at the stars, and I'm transfixed by it. And I think that would have been. In fact, our younger daughter was going into the sciences. And you know how dads are, I was kind of, what about astronomy? And she just didn't go in that direction, but I gave it a little shot.
Well, I didn't expect that. It's very interesting because now you went into finances.
Yep.
And helping people with finances. Talk a little bit more about what your mission is with that.
Well, I was a financial advisor for about 21 years. And last year in July, I was standing in my kitchen and the phone rang out of nowhere. And it was a competitor, a group, an advisory group in Colorado Springs where we used to live. And they said, you want to merge? And I said, not really. I'm okay. I'm probably closer to retiring than merging. And he said, that could work. So one thing led to another. That was July, and October 31st, we closed and I sold the business, and I'm not anywhere near ready to retire. I actually tried it, and it just didn't work. So I decided that I was just going to help people I was providing financial guidance for business owners and for individuals. And instead of charging the 1 or 2% of all your assets and everything you own, I just do it by an hourly basis, keep it nice and simple. And guidance, it's funny, when I was an advisor, sometimes you're like a bartender, you hear the whole thing, but there's a lot of little things in there, a lot of tidbits in there that can help you provide that guidance based on their life and what matters to them, And I learned along the way, I learned over the decades of doing this, that there's more than one way to do anything. And the key is to match up the person with the tactics and the strategy. So everybody's different. Everyone's different.
Can you be a servant when finances are complex?
Yeah.
Can you be a servant with finances?
If you can listen. Here, the good news is that there are so many financial options out there. The bad news is that there are so many financial options out there. And so I believe, this is just me, I believe that an advisor, has to listen very carefully to what's going on and really understand the individual. Because then what a smart person can do, a smart advisor can do, is narrow down the options, right? So that there might be 1,000 options out there, and that might be true. If you can get it down to maybe 2 or 3 really good options, then you can say, okay, what feels good to you? What would feel right? And let them choose, because I know that whatever they choose is going to be a good one. And I'll tell you, when it comes to personal finance, I'm sure everyone has heard the question, should I pay off my house or should I not? Should I invest that money? Right? Everyone asks that question. Well, my answer is a little different. My answer is, okay, you tell me what would make you feel better. What would you like? Do you like the idea of owning that deed? Does that really excite you? Or does it excite you more to see money grow, in its own? And 98% of the time they'll have an answer for that. Yeah. And suddenly everything has become simple simply because I asked them, what they want, what excites them.
And interesting, I love how you say that. I love the listen part, because I tell people all the time, you can't serve until you listen, no matter what you're doing, finances. And we talk about complexity, but there's bad financial people out there that have given bad advice.
Yeah.
What's a piece of advice you'd give somebody if they walking into talking to an advisor or a guide in their finances?
That's a really, really tough question, Stephen. Here's the thing. It's almost impossible to really have a good idea of what is going on in someone's mind and heart. And so the best thing that you can do is get a referral, someone who has worked with that person, who knows firsthand, and maybe you could ask them questions about, ask them the regular questions about experience, but try to ask questions that open them up as an individual. And there is one quality that I think matters. And you and I, before the podcast, we were kind of talking about life,
Yeah.
and there's one thing that a person, in my opinion, really needs, and that is curiosity. If you're not curious, you're closing yourself off to that part of the world. And so I would like to know that an advisor is curious, that they're always asking questions, they're always looking for ideas. To me, that would be a pretty high priority too, in addition to having been recommended by somebody that has worked with them. But is this person, and I'll tell you, I hate hearing the phrase, well, we've never done it that way before, so we're not going to do it that way. That doesn't work for me. If you're not curious, you're missing out on a lot. And the same goes for advisors.
Yeah. Emotions are a big part of finances.
Ooh, yeah, you bet.
It's probably one of the biggest.
Yeah.
What's a tip for people? And two, how do you serve people when the emotions come into play when you work guiding them through their finances?
Boy, and I have a very good example. It's in discovering what they understand. How much of this do they really understand? And this was an epiphany I had about halfway through my career, about 10 years into it. If you talk to an advisor, they're going to say, and we've all heard this, they'll say, well, what if the market drops 10%? Or how will you feel if the market drops 15%? Well, people go, well, that's supposed to happen. I understand that's part of the deal. It hit me one day. That's the wrong question. The right question is, let's say they have $500,000. And you say, well, what happens if the market drops 10%? You would lose $50,000. What do you think of that? I don't know, Steve, why, but once I started asking that question, the answers were totally different.
Yeah.
People can handle a 10% drop in their psychologically, but $50,000, that's a different deal.
Great way to handle it. Oh. Emotions are about what's in our control, but what we can feel. Like you said, 10%, that's fine. And you give me guidance, say, hey, here's how we're going to make it up and things. We talked about trading before the show, and that's emotions a big part of it. What is your least favorite emotion that people show when they talk about finances?
Boy, we go back to the big picture, Steve, and talking about life. And my least favorite emotion is regret. And that is looking back and saying, I wish I had done that differently. Or I wish I hadn't messed it up like that. Or I wish I had jumped when I didn't, and I played it safe. And for business owners, you're not playing it safe. You have to jump. You're either going to jump or you're not.
Yeah.
And so, and another example of regret is when a business owner doesn't. I know this is a eat your broccoli moment, Steve. So forgive me, but when a business owner doesn't write a business plan, and they just jump into it. And then what I want to say is, if we had written a business plan, this wouldn't have happened because we would have foreseen it coming. And so if you're going to do something, do it right, but don't look back with regret, try to do things so that you won't look back in regret later on.
A great tip for people listening that want to start a business, or you have a business, you're a year in, you're struggling. Do you have a business, right?
Absolutely.
Jump in and do it. Yeah. What's interesting, debt is an emotional thing. And people probably ask you this question, how do I get out of debt?
Yeah.
That's a big question, I know, but what would I came to you and said, hey, I'm in debt. Ryan, how do I get out of it? What would you say?
Well, here's another eat your broccoli moment. And it is the first thing you have to do. Oh boy, I know people hate this. Here's the word: budget. And I always tell people, please, if you're going to learn one software program, learn Excel. And I'm not paid by Microsoft to say that. But you need to go through your budget. You need to see where your spending is, and where can I cut this? And you know what? It's just like when you're looking at an income statement in a business. Mm-hmm. Every line item, you should ask yourself, am I optimizing that number? Does that number need to be there? Can it be better in some way? So it's the income and the outgo. So on the outgo side, you have to do that. You absolutely have to do that. And then you have to make sure that you're not spending money that you don't need to spend, obviously, right? So where can I cut? And pay yourself first. So when you're doing this budget, set aside X dollars simply for paying things down. When I was an advisor, I was also a Dave Ramsey SmartVestor Pro.
Love it.
He did a lot of things in that area. What was nice about him was that he didn't just concentrate on, getting rich with mutual funds. He talked about the whole picture. And he called it the snowball, where you pay off one, maybe a high interest loan or something like that, credit cards. You got to do it just month by month. And the strangest thing is, Steve, the days go by and suddenly you paid one off. And when you write that check, or when you click that mouse and you're paying off a credit card or a loan, it's like it's a big day. It's cool.
Christmas Day. I've done it before. It's like Christmas, a gift coming to you. And I'm going to say, audience, I use the Every Money budgeting account. It's free with Ramsey. I follow his podcast, so I'm glad you mentioned that, because I agree with you. You know what's interesting in finances is, should you run your personal finances like you run a business finance? It's different, but what you were telling me, it's kind of similar in a way.
Yeah, there are similarities and differences. Now, obviously, with a business, without getting too deep into this, there are things like short-term cash flow loans to make sure that you're liquid and all that. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with running your, it's still the same two things. It's income and outgo, right? And my whole life, all the time I owned my businesses, I had my Excel spreadsheet, and I knew to the dollar what was coming out when and what was coming in when. And it's just a feeling of control. You're the only person who can control this. And so it's up to you to decide. You know why? Because you don't look back and regret that you hadn't just taken the time to learn the Excel and to sit there and just, you go through your bank account every month and look where the money went. Okay, let's put that in paper. And I think a lot of people don't do that, Steve, because they're almost afraid of what they're going to see. And that's okay. That's a really human trait. Yeah. But don't look back and regret and wish you had.
2 words: control and win.
Yes, absolutely.
The win gets people I talk to all the time. Oh, I didn't know this insurance bill was coming up. Oh, I don't have the money.
Yep.
Yeah. You project in the future like a business does. And you're right, they're different, but the similarity is the base. That's like right. Really, my business partner, Max Lambright, I'll do a shout out. He calls it, you're the CEO of your business, of your life.
Right. That's right.
I'm a husband, and we work together, but we do different things. But I but I run the family, and that's what you're saying. Exactly. Another big elephant in the room, because I'm at that age at 62, is retirement.
Yeah.
Do you give advice on that? What do you do?
Oh, I hate to play favorites. That may be my favorite thing. And here's the thing: when you do retirement income planning, it's so funny, because I ask just 6 questions, and that helps me narrow things down very, very, very quickly. And so what we do is, and I do meetings on Zoom, like we're talking now, and so we work nationwide. And almost, I shouldn't say almost every time, a majority of the time, the people are pleasantly surprised at what their numbers are going to look like in retirement. So literally, if I know the answers to those 6 questions, then I can estimate a number for you that will be your monthly income in 7 years.
Wow.
And it's just math. It's just numbers. And I don't even like math that much, quite frankly, but you plug it in and boom, there it is. So and I think they go, why didn't we do this before? This wasn't that tough, you know? And that's all there is to it. So you think about things like Social Security, which is going to be there at least for a while. So if you're anywhere near retirement age right now, you count Social Security, which is higher than a lot of people think it is. And then we extrapolate out your investments and what they might look like in X years. And then we have a very specific rule for income. So how much income can I take every month without running out of money? You don't want to outlive your money.
Yeah.
Well, there's a very specific formula for that too. And so suddenly people go, I'm going to be making $5,268 a month when I retire.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
okay, there it is. Yeah.
I like that, because what I'm hearing from you is you could try to do this on your own, but there's so much intrigue and become complex.
Yeah.
And a guidance like you guide like you, or an advisor, whatever you want to title it, is so important, especially when you got a lot of money. I mean, even a little money, you still need to do it. Well, people always say, oh, finances are complex. You make it sound simple. How do you do that?
I spent a lot of time putting that little, what I just told you, that the 6 questions. I spent a lot of time putting that together, and it was over many years of talking with people, and that's it. It's 6 questions, and I'll tell you. I mean, how much do you have in retirement savings right now? How much are you contributing every month between you and maybe your employer might have some kind of matching? How many years before you're going to retire? And a couple of other things off the top of my head, but that's it. It's really that simple. Are you going to have other income like a pension, or are you going to have some kind of a rental property? Okay. And we come up with this number, and it's just, and I just hand it to them, and there it is. I really think that they're shocked at how easy that is, but that's only half of it.
Yeah.
Because the other half is that dreaded eat your broccoli word, budget. Because I don't care if you're making $5,000 a month in retirement. If you're spending 7,000, we got a problem.
Yeah.
So we have to talk about that too.
Taking action too. With
Yes.
the budget is taking action, and then other things. Really take that 3,000 and put it here or there. And I learned that at 18. I financial advisor. I don't like to talk about myself in my show, but people need to hear this. He told me, read The Wealthy Barber at 18. This is in 79. And basically the book says save 10% of your income and put it away. Don't touch it. Well, 12 years later, I had $58,000 in that account.
There you go.
So I lived it. And what you're saying, Ryan, is absolutely true, because I lived it. Of course, I spent half of it 30 and did my 30-year-old things, but that's a whole different story.
Hey, you're human.
Oh, yeah. What I like what you do is you take people, and the listen thing comes again. But advisors need to understand their people. How deep do you need to understand them?
I don't know if there is a limit to that. You have to listen. You have to ask the right questions. An example was the thing about the difference between losing 1% and losing dollars. Okay, you really, and you have to watch them. And when they ask the question, when I asked them the question about, house, paying off the house or investing the money, that kind of thing. What's really interesting is when you get spouses, when you get a husband and wife, the conversation that they have going back and forth, because a lot of the time they've never been asked this question before. And so I used to have great fun asking it, just stuff like that. But the dynamic and the questions that they ask you in response speak volumes, but you've got to be listening to it. And then once you grab onto something, like a shark, once you grab onto something, then you ask them more questions. And the thing is, the problem is, if you go online, or if you listen, if you watch one of these guys screaming at you on the television on what stocks to buy, okay, they don't know you. They don't know anything about your finances. They don't know anything about your psychology or your marriage or your family or your kids or your college or your house. They don't know anything about that stuff. And they're screaming at you, telling you what to do. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. So it has to be a conversation. And by the way, now that I think about it, because I just went to the doctor over my allergies, you have to you have to talk too. You have to talk to your advisor too, and you have to answer their questions, because the more you tell a doctor, I've learned, the more you tell a doctor, the higher your chances are of getting that thing fixed.
Yep.
Well, the same thing goes for your advisor, because they're going to do something based on their perception of what you've told them. And they're going to say, okay, let's do this. Maybe that wasn't right, but it's not his fault, because he's only got what he's working with, right? So communication is absolutely key, both ways.
No, the communication to me is both way. And I'm glad you said that word, because listen's one part of it, the communication. Because it's like, it's an analogy. You put gas in your car, and you never push the gas pedal, you're not going anywhere, because you're not asking enough questions to know enough.
That's right.
And it comes to my mind too, I'm 62. So 30 years ago, advising is much different than it is now for me and for everybody. So that's why you got to stay connected with them, or somebody has to stay connected with the advisor, because this is ever evolving and changing, right?
It is. Finances, aren't just, buying a stock. There's tax implications. There's the retirement implications, and there's a lot of things that go into this. And so there are some people, what are they called? Robo advisors. And if you go online, you'll see some of these who help you invest. If you have no questions, if your life is simple, if you don't need any help, do it by all means. But I'll tell you, if you have a life, where taxes are concerned, if you've got kids, if you've got a business, you need someone who can just go back and forth with you, that you can trust, by the way. And again, that, you need to be able to find that person. But there's a lot of back and forth in this. And a lot of times a person will have heard something, right? They saw it online or saw it on the internet or something. And I've got to say, I get the question, but no, you shouldn't do that.
Yep.
And that's okay, because at least they brought it up, but I don't want them to look back with regret and say, I wish I had been more forthcoming, because then we would have been on the right road earlier.
Yeah.
And you got to do it right.
Yeah. That's, it got me speechless. It rarely happens, but this complexity keeps coming to my head. And with finances, somebody goes, well, I have a financial advisor, but I'm not sure they're working well for me.
Yeah.
This, what's that step? Because I know that happens. I have people come to me and go, hey, who's your financial advisor? Because this one's not working for me. And I always wish I had a good answer for them, because you can't just say, leave that advisor. There's got to be some depth into the conversation, right?
Yeah. Okay. So as a numbers geek, I guess my response was going to be, my impulse, Steve, was to answer that by saying, well, compare your returns to the market. But that's really not a good answer. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is value in communication. There is value in asking a stupid question and having them answer it for you. That's okay.
Yeah.
I got so many stupid questions I learned so much from, you wouldn't believe it. So there's a lot that goes into this. So it depends on what your priorities are. If you're after beating the market, which ain't easy to do, okay, well then you can measure your numbers versus the S&P 500 or whatever it is. But if you're able to call him, I don't know if I'm really beating the market, but I'm growing, and he's been so helpful with my family, and that college fund was so good, and he helped us with our budget. I don't know, that's a lot of value there. And so it's not necessarily something you can put on paper.
Yeah.
So bottom line, I think if you're happy with the relationship, I'm a big believer in, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
Have an idea on maybe how you're doing financially versus the market, maybe, but if you're happy, yeah, I'm okay with that.
And I asked that question because that's what I was thinking. You need to build a relationship. If that's a fractured relationship, whether it's a marriage, financial advisor, your health agent, your church, it doesn't matter. That's time to maybe look and go. So building relationships is important with your advisor.
Yeah, it is. And I'll tell you, how would I put this? I took many clients from other advisors. And some of them really felt bad. And I think they came to me for other reasons, but they really felt bad when they had to let the other guy go.
Yeah.
And that's a good sign, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that tells me that they at least had a good personal relationship, but they
Yeah.
just weren't satisfied with what happened. But yeah, it is a relationship, and with a good relationship comes good communication and honesty, and it's some things don't change.
Yeah. I experienced with a friend of mine who had lost hundreds of thousands of dollars with an advisor. They said, oh, they're going to fix it. They're going to, just because they didn't want to leave them, like you
Yeah,
just said.
yeah.
So you got to be careful because it could really damage you. It's a fine line. We're not going to answer on this podcast, but we're running out of time here. We've gone over, which I'm so happy because you've given so many great tips. Well, who's your boyhood idol when you grew up?
Well, I'll tell you, I got a chance to talk to him.
Wow.
My boyhood idol was Ringo Starr, with the Beatles, and I was a musician. I've been a musician since I was 5, and I learned to play the drums by playing along with Beatles songs. And later, when I was in radio before I was an advisor, I was in radio for 20 years. I got the chance to interview him twice. And he's just a sweetheart. He's just like you would think he was. He's just a goofy sweetheart. And the second time I finally worked up the nerve, and I said, Ringo, by the way, you taught me how to play the drums. I learned how to play by playing along. And he goes, oh, okay, well, I won't charge you for that.
That's great.
So, yeah, it was so neat. The first thing I did after I was able to talk to him was I told my whole family, because they knew, and
Yeah.
that was real neat. You don't get the chance to do that very often.
Oh, that's a blessing when you get to meet your hero or idol. That is
Sure.
fantastic. Well, I want to thank you for being on. And audience, this is one of the few podcasts I've done where you can make money from what Ryan has told you and given us tips. And it's been fantastic. Ryan, how can they reach out to you if they have any questions?
Real easy. The website is Alpha for Business, Alpha, the number 4 business. And my email is Ryan, RYAN, at Alpha for Business.
We'll have the information on the show notes. Again, thank you again, Ryan. This has been fabulous. And everybody, we'll see you on the next episode of Doing Business with a Servant's Heart. Thank you.